ahead and introduce to you guys Jess Nevins. LSC-Tomball reference librarian Jess Nevins is the author of he has published 9 reference books on genre. He writes Victoriana literature. He's a scholar on the horror of H.P. Lovecraft and steampunk fiction. He is the author of a World Fantasy Award nominated Encyclopedia of Fantastic Victoriana, and he's well known for his extensive comic book annotations, especially the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. In fact, Mr. Nevins is so recognized for his contributions and annotations of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen that one can find covert references to Mr. Nevins in the volume 2 of this book. In fact, Alan Moore, who is the author of Watchmen and V for Vendetta, who is the named comic book writer ever. In fact, his Watchmen was voted one of the 100 best novels of the century by Time magazine in 2000, has acknowledged in multiple interviews that Mr. Nevins' annotations, he sees them as having a necessary organic place in the body of the work itself. So please welcome Mr. Jess Nevins.
Well, thank you. My voice is kind of rough to begin with, and maybe about dirt. You should be working on your.
I couldn't support you.
My voice may give me a voice. When Kim Carter asked me to do this, I was a bit adrift. I wasn't sure what I could possibly talk about, and so she suggested that I talk about my interests when I was younger and trace the path that I took to parlaying my hobby into something serious and professional. The theme would be that you don't have to give up what you love, and what you love does not have to remain an unexamined hobby. There are opportunities everywhere and in almost anything. So I'm going to be talking, am I getting feedback? Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'll be talking a little bit about that. This is going well, I can tell. Talk a little bit about that through my own work. And I've brought sample books, some of my sample books right over here that you're free to look at. I was going to hold them up as examples as I talked, but when I was a kid, I was a geek, a nerd, a dork, whatever you want to call it. I was into comics and Dungeons and Dragons and science fiction and horror and all those sorts of socially disrespected things. And when I got older, I never really lost the taste for any of them, but I found that it was possible to write them in such a way, take advantage of them, use them in such a way that I didn't have to be quite so socially disrespected. I started with the comic book annotations. For those of you who don't know, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a series of comic books which is based on the premise, what if various Victorian characters coexisted in the same world at the same time. So Captain Nemo, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Mina Harker from Dracula, and the Invisible Man, and so on. And at the time that this came out, I was running a Hollywood gossip website because I'm a list maker and that's what I do, and I love Hollywood gossip. So I had this long Hollywood gossip website. And the comic book came out and I thought, well, this is interesting. Why don't I start making a list of all the references? And one thing led to another, and I soon had a website that was just an enormous list of references in the comic book, because the comic book is written to be just full of Victorian references. I've got I managed to turn my annotations into 200 plus pages of a book, just referencing one Victorian reference after another in the comic. And so I put that up on the website, and it got a pretty good reaction, including by the comic book writer and the comic book artist. And so I managed to persuade a small press publisher in Austin to turn it into a book, and it got published, and I made some money, and that was all very nice. That hadn't been my intention when I started. I just put it up on the website and got a lot of good feedback, and then it became a book. And while I was writing Heroes and Monsters, I thought, well, I'm writing about Victorian literature, Victorian culture. Why don't I turn this into another book? Why don't I expand this and do other Victorian things? And that became this, which is a 1,000-page encyclopedia of Victorian popular culture and popular literature. This also started as a web page. I just thought, okay, what are some of the characters in novels that haven't appeared in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but might? And once I got into Victorian literature, I realized what a fantastically deep field it is, how many great books and authors there were, and how many better, and how many, can you turn this off? And how many great novels and writers there were in the 19th century that are forgotten about now. And so I wrote about those and turned it into a website and persuaded another publisher to let me publish it as a book. And so that came out, and that was pretty well received. I was a finalist for the World Fantasy Award for this. I didn't win the award, which is a recurring theme with me. I don't win the award. But I got nominated. That was the important thing. And so while I was writing that, I had the idea of doing a sequel to this set in the 20th century. Characters and concepts from the first half of the 20th century that everyone's forgotten about. There were authors who've written literally dozens of novels, over 100 novels about one character, who show up in Google less than a dozen times. Posterity is very cruel to these authors. They're just completely forgotten about. And so I thought, well, why don't I turn that into a website? That eventually became my Encyclopedia of Pulp Heroes, which is, the manuscript right now is 1,700 pages long. I actually printed it out to bring it down, but the manuscript's like this big, so I didn't bring it down. But while I was working on that, I thought, well, I'm having a hard time finding these pulp magazines. Why don't I make a list of where they are? So I started making a list of where all the pulp magazines are, and then realized there was no such list out there. Nobody had compiled a list. So I turned that into a book, which I persuaded McFarland Publishing to publish as a book. And after that, I continued working on Victoria, and I continued working on Pulp Heroes until I had the idea to do a little bit of writing on steampunk, which was starting to become popular at the time. Steampunk, for those of you who don't know, is Victorian science fiction set in an urban environment based on what would happen if the Victorians had developed modern technology. And so I wrote about it and put it up on a webpage, and got approached by a magazine book editor who was doing a book on steampunk, who wanted to include my essay in his book. I did that, and then he turned that book into a series of anthologies, and he kept inviting me back to write more for him. So that was great. And because of that entrance, because of my appearance there, I was asked to do an introduction to an anthology on urban fantasy. So I wrote the history of urban fantasy for that anthology, which was called Paper Cities. That was also a finalist for the World Fantasy that I also didn't make. So I was writing all this, and then was invited because of my, I wouldn't say prominence online, because nobody's ever really prominent online. It's the equivalent of being a one-hit wonder or a studio musician in Norman, Oklahoma, world of pop culture. But you get a little bit of fame. And I got invited to give a talk at a transhumanist conference in California. And so I talked about how in the 1900s, there was this whole trend toward physical culture, working out, that made people think that these physical marvels of exercise were going to become a new breed of humans. So that talk was well received and got linked a bunch online. And after that, I got invited to give a talk on the history of superheroes at Popular Culture Association of America conference in New Orleans, which was received very well. And because of that talk, I was asked to do a series of essays for a comic book called Incognito. And I did a series of essays on various pulp characters, pulps being magazines from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. And at the same time, I was doing a series of articles on international pulp fiction for the magazine Coil House. And because of that, I was asked to do an article on the history of apes and literature for an ape anthology called Apes of Wrath. And that went over well, and because of that, I was asked to write an encyclopedia of fairy tales. This one just came out this Wednesday, and it's a companion to a comic book called Fables, which is set in a world where all the fables coexist in the same time. And so I did a encyclopedia explaining where all the fables came from, not in terms of comic books, but where they really came from. So Rapunzel, her first appearance was in 1812, but she originally appeared in the 17th century, and there have been oral and written versions of her story going back to the 1630s, and so on. At the same time I was doing that, I was writing a role-playing game, now, which became this, which is due out in a couple weeks. Now, what this is not really a role-playing game. It's a guide to history and culture and geography in the 1930s and the 1940s and the 1950s, and character archetypes from popular culture at the same time. While all that's going on, I'm still working on my pulp encyclopedia, which is going to be published sometime in the spring. Now, I'm sure all of this has been very interesting to all of you. But I do have some points to make while I'm talking about this. I've become relatively successful enough that I don't feel I need to do anything more with nonfiction, and I'm working on a novel at the moment. So I have been relatively successful. I've made a little bit of money, not very much, but I have made a little bit of money doing this. I have a relatively decent Q rating online, and I have as much fame as I could possibly want, which again isn't much in terms of the internet, which is very little in terms of anything at all, but I've got as much as I could possibly want. How did I do this? Well, one thing led to another, as I hope I made clear, but anyone could do this. Anyone really could do what I do what I did. There are a couple of easy ways to make it happen. First is access. I had access to an enormous amount of material for my various books. All of you have access to this material and information as well. It's the internet. There is, not to get too old fart, but you kids just don't appreciate what research was like back before the internet was around. We had to actually open books, but now you can sit in front of the computer and within minutes you can get just about anything at all. I was trying to research something in Brooklyn in 1927, and within a couple of keystrokes I discovered that the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, which is a Brooklyn newspaper, is completely online. I was wondering where the pulp magazines were, and I found the website WorldCat, which we've all got access to. It's on the internet and open to everyone. And that tells where individual books and magazines are in various libraries around the world. It's all out there waiting to be used. Additionally, because you're students, you have access to a wide range of databases, which has tens of millions of articles on just about everything imaginable. Now, some of you I've seen in class before, and I've done the lecture, and some of you I'm going to see in class and do the little song and dance about how to do research online. But if you're doing this for pleasure, or pleasure in work, and not just because you have to, you soon realize that the databases and the internet provide so much material that just about anything you can think of to write on, there's material out there to make use of it. There are, if you want to write a novel, there's historical material out there. If you want to write a book on nonfiction, undoubtedly whatever you're going to write about is out there on the internet. It's all out there, you just have to go out and look for it. Second thing I had was inspiration. Now, that's a tough one. No one can actually inspire you, give you a publishable idea. But ideas are all around us. There are any number of things you can write about if you want it. I'll give you one for free. Kansas City in the 1920s was a hub of organized crime in the Midwest. The history of Kansas City during this time period has yet to be written. Now, I'm not going to write that because I don't want to spend 5 years traveling to Kansas City doing research and publish a book that maybe 300 people will read. But if one of you is interested in this, and the history of Kansas City in the organized crime area is fascinating, there are all sorts of urban legends that come out of it. If one of you wants to do that, the information's out there. You know, you just have to write it. Ideas are all around us. Every writer I know has more ideas than they can write about. Having the idea is not the hard part. It's actually executing it. That's the hard part. The third thing is time. And this is really what separates people who want to write from people who are driven to write. Anyone can write. It just requires you to invest the time into it. If you're a prodigy, writing is easy. You can just dash off a first draft and be done with it. Alan Moore is a prodigy. He doesn't write second drafts. Everything he writes is a first draft. I'm not a prodigy, so I have to work at it. This took 2 years to write, 2 years of 10-hour days. 2 years of 10-hour days. I didn't take weekends off. I didn't take holidays off. My wife was overjoyed to see me working 10 hours a day on Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's. But the end result after all that work was this, which lost an award, which again is recurring theme of my career. But I'm really rather proud of it. There's nothing else like it out there. And by the way, copies of this go for $500, $600 online. It's true. I've seen one go for $3,500. It was a limited print run. Anyone can write anything if you're willing to put the time into it. Everyone has the same amount of time. We've all got 24 hours in the day. You may think you're too busy, but as has been said elsewhere, if you put 15 minutes a day of writing into a project, at the end of the week you'll have a couple hours worth of work. At the end of the year you'll have 50, 60 hours, something like that. Math isn't my strong point. No one's so busy that they can't write. It's just a matter of willpower. Do you want to write? Do you want it bad enough? Are you willing to invest the time into your project? Something else I found extremely useful, and this should be of interest to students, is double dipping, making use of one project in another setting. For you, write a paper for one class and then use that paper in another class. The teachers won't know. I've spent years working on my pulp encyclopedia, and I've gotten an enormous amount of material seriously, this much, on it. And I've used that material for other presentations, other papers, other books. If you do research, make use of it in as many different areas and locations as possible. Networking. This is tricky for writers because we're introverts. We don't, I say we, I mean me really, but we don't like talking to people. It's like having your skin abraded. Be much happier just sitting in your office doing nothing. But if you want to get published, networking is pretty much essential. You've got to do it. So go to the conferences, go to the conventions, go to the book signings, meet people, put yourself out there, take advantage of social networking advantages, opportunities. Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Flickr, Instagram. Put yourself out there. I did. It was hardly uncomfortable for me, but I did. And I met various editors and have taken advantage of those friendships and associations to get published. You don't want to be out there hustling yourself all the time, but at the same time, you want to make them aware that you are available as a writer. Just this week, I was asked to do an introduction for a comic book series, and the only way I got to write that is that I am on Twitter and I'm followed by the guy who's writing the comic book. Networking is key. You'll note that I made a lot of my material public. This is also key in the 21st century to being a successful writer. Get it out there. Don't wait for it to be published. Put it out on the internet. Put it out on the webpage, put it out on the blog. Make it available to everybody. You're not actually losing money by doing that. You're growing your audience. And once you grow your audience, you can have them follow you into paying venues, which may seem a bit of a leap of faith, but it happens. It's happened for a lot of writers I know. It happened for me. You make it available on a website, you build your audience, and the audience is interested in following you wherever you go, and so you can actually start charging them to buy things from you or download them illegally from the internet. But make it public. You also want to be generous with your work. One of the keys to being a successful writer in the marketplace today is by earning social capital. Make yourself available for interviews. If someone wants you to write something for relatively little money, do it. I'm writing an introduction to, or writing an article for a scholarly journal for $50. Now, I don't want to prorate how much that $50 is going to be per minute I spend working on the article. It would get really depressing. I'll earn less than a penny per hour ultimately, but it's getting my name out there. I'm being generous in sharing my work for relatively little money. Lastly, these days success is not just defined in the traditional way by the traditional gatekeepers. I've been successful largely through the internet. I've been published in a couple of peer-reviewed journals, but I didn't go the traditional publishing route. I didn't submit my work to the big 6 publishers. I didn't try and get Victoriana or any of the others published in the traditional fashion. I went the small press route, I went the internet route, and I've ended up being successful. You can do that too. You can make a name for yourself online and build your Q rating that way, make yourself a brand, and be successful using the internet rather than the traditional scholarly route. Now, I feel insecure about myself compared to mainstream scholars. But the truth is that I had a print run of 2,000 copies with this book, and roughly 1,500 people of the 2,000 who bought it, roughly 1,500, I'd say, kept the book and have read it. So I had, for this book, 1,500 readers. The average history book writer prays that he gets that many readers. The average writer of a mainstream thought book, Malcolm Gladwell, those histories of Salt and Cod and the Plow and all that, they get 100 readers, 200 readers, 300 readers. If you look at the sales numbers, people who publish the traditional route get depressingly few readers. Going through the internet, going through small presses actually gave me a bigger audience than more mainstream writers. So I am insecure about the more accepted authors, but at the same time, I laugh at them because I have more readers than they do. And so in that respect, I'm more successful. Last thing I want to say is that once you've built your audience, you can take advantage of it for whatever purposes. I did a Kickstarter. For those of you who don't know, Kickstarter is an online fundraising scheme. I wanted to do an encyclopedia of comic book characters from the 1930s and 1940s because such a thing had never been written before. So I decided to write it, but to write it, I would have to do research on it, and to do research, I'd have to go to Michigan State University for a couple of weeks and do research there. And doing that costs money. Plane ticket, airline, or plane ticket, hotel, rental car, daily cost, food, drink, whatnot. It was all going to add up to a lot of money. So I made it a Kickstarter project. I said to the world and to my audience, if you give me money, I will give you X reward. If you give me more money, I'll give you X plus Y reward. X plus Y reward being electronic copies of my books, physical copies of my books, reference librarian services available to them, and in two cases, a hat that my wife knit. So I did an online fundraiser, and I got roughly $16,000. Now, of that $16,000, about $6,000 had to come out and be spent actually writing the book. That still left me a profit of about $10,000. Now, you will go a long way before you find a writer of nonfiction books who makes that much off their book. Most people who write nonfiction books, most of the books you see in the bookstore, Malcolm Gladwell, like I said, Gladwell, the cultural histories and whatnot, they're writing for their job because they have to publish through their profession, through their university, rather than for the money. And they get paid maybe in advance of $1,500, and then they get maybe $1,000 more. I have earned a lot of authors just through a Kickstarter, and I did that through my audience. And my audience is relatively limited because I have geek interests, and the geek audience is faithful but not overwhelmingly huge. And if I were to write about the, for example, A&M's football team, you can imagine what sort of audience you'd get there. Or I know somebody who's doing a history of the famous brothel in Texas over Ken Udon. The Chicken Ranch. Yes, I know someone who's writing a history of the Chicken Ranch and has done interviews and is now looking for a publisher. If he were to Kickstarter it, the number of people who contribute to that book in exchange for a free copy of the book would be enormous. You could make a lot of money off that. So there are different ways you can define success, but you don't have to go the traditional publishing route. You can do them through the internet or through whatever way you're interested in. So that's the end of my disorganized little spiel. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
You mentioned curating a few times. What is that?
It is slang for your how well known you are, how notable you are, your level of influence, your level of respectability. It's a Hollywood term. The most famous stars have the most famous Q rating, but when you're measuring internet fame, you can also apply it that way. And as I've said, internet fame is really like being the biggest fish in a mud puddle, but you still have a Q rating on the internet if you get any sort of fame. No, it's just the letter Q. Anyone else? Yes.
No, I have a question. Do you think that you could get a good audience if you did an AMA on Reddit?
Possibly. I've been afraid to because of the enormous sound of crickets I hear and get no questions. But I could probably get a decent audience on an AMA on the website or Reddit. Yeah, maybe. I'll never find out because I'm afraid of being humiliated. But well, there was a question. Yes.
How much time did you spend on your first book? And how much time, did you spend it up like a day, or did you spend writing on it like from a week or something like that?
First book took about 3 months. Because it was relatively scholarly, I could write it on the job, so I spent time during the day writing it. I couldn't tell you in terms of hours, but 3 months working on it every day. The amount of this one took a summer, and again, because it's scholarly work, I could do it on the job, but it was 6 hours a day every day for all the summer. So it really depends on the book, but few of them are easily written. Most of them are pretty time consuming. And my Paul Pierre's encyclopedia I've been working on for about 10 years.
You said that you would post some of it online, and like that's how you kind of started out. Did you write an entire book and post it online, or did you post it chapter by chapter?
I posted it as it happened. It was just, I'd post a bit on a web page, and then I'd add to it, and I'd add to it. And then when it was done, it was a complex, it was a suite of web pages, but it was essentially a book. And making it into a book, I just had to rewrite it.
Okay.
Yes.
How long of a period of time did you actually put things on the website before it became time to make it into a book?
4 years?
4 years.
Yes.
At what point did you decide that you were going to be a writer? Like, was it when you started your website? Is that when you decided that you were a writer? Or was it when you first published?
I've always wanted to be one, but I wasn't thinking in terms of a writing career when I started putting it on the website. It was when a publisher, the small press publisher in Austin, approached me that I thought, hey, wait a minute, I could actually turn this into a book. And that's what got me started on as a writer. But I'd always wanted to be one. I just hadn't really put the effort into it. Yes.
How much funding, on average, do you need to start a project?
It depends on the project. For this one, I made 6 trips to London to go to the British Library to do research. I don't want to think about how much money I spent, but it was a lot of money. But for this one, it didn't cost anything. Except time. I just spent time in front of the computer. It really varies from project to project. For this one, I had to save up a lot of money and I didn't get an advance from a publisher, so I had to spend it out of pocket. But it's going to vary depending on what you want to write. Yes?
For your the encyclopedia comic book character teacher that kickstarted, is that going to be like Golden Age or Golden and Silver Age?
1939 to 1951, so Golden Age. And it's on a website now, the Encyclopedia of Golden Age Superheroes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
You must take advantage of social media, and yet you don't want to place yourself out on Reddit, even though that could be your target audience, considering the amount of people that spend time on the internet.
Yeah, it's because, like I said, I'm afraid that no one would come, and that would be really embarrassing. On Twitter, I can build an audience. I have built an audience. I've got something like 4,000 followers. But in a Reddit AMA, it's a matter of courage, which I lack.
What you could do is post on Twitter that you're going to make an anime on Reddit, and your followers will. Yes. That's what they do. That's what
Okay, as long as you're going to be there.
And harassing.
Okay, I'm down. Yes.
Have you ever written anything that you didn't really have so much of a care to get published, you just wanted to write it?
Yeah, I've written 3 novels, which God willing, no one will ever see.
Challenge accepted.
No.
Were they published?
No. They're in a,
They're in the bowels of your hard drive?
yes, they are what we call trunked. They're not going to see the light of day because they're not ready yet. In terms of nonfiction, no, because I usually had a good sense of what people are going to want, or what I can sell, or what is going to be interesting to people. In terms of fiction, they say you have to write 1 million words of crap to get any good as a writer, and I haven't hit 1 million words yet, so. Yes.
You say, be generous, share, and do you ever find publishers who say, well, you are really essentially published?
No, but I've usually had success by convincing them that with the success of the books I've already had, I put them online, and then when they've been published through small press, they've sold X number of copies. So there really, at least in my experience, there hasn't been any correlation between availability online and lack of sales. Putting them online doesn't shrink the slice of the pie, it grows the pie. Fiction, most of the writers I know who have put work online have found it helps them to entice agents and writers. So if I write something in terms of fiction that I think if people are ready to read isn't horrible, I'll probably put part of it online. Yes?
Alright, so 2 things. One, you said you raised like $16,000 on Kickstarter. What was your baseline that you asked for as the minimum? And the other one is, what was your hook to be like, I need to go to this place, I need this much money so I can do this and research this, like all of it?
My baseline was $3,000. And my hook was, I'm going to make this book into a website, and it'll be free for the world if I make my money. If you give me $10, then you'll get an electronic copy of the book. If I make my $3,000, I will turn the book into a website. And if they gave me $20, they get an electronic copy of the book plus an electronic copy of one of my other books. And if they gave me $50, they'd get 3 electronic copies, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I started off with $3,000, and the hook was that if I make my money, then the book becomes a website, and everybody gets to take advantage of
It's
it.
public, free for everyone.
Right.
As if everyone gives donations.
Right.
So does that mean that you're better at writing on pressure, or that you're selling your book basically before you finish it to get that money to finish your book and sell it?
For that one, it helped that I knew there was interest out there. I knew that I knew that there wasn't anything like it out there, and that comic book fans and comic book writers would take advantage of it. Other books, not so sure, but that one. Yes.
Question, how does your wife put up? Or what is she
She was a saint when I was writing Victoriana, and it actually put some strain on the marriage because I was spending so much time working on it. After that, we had a talk, and I scaled back the amount of work I actually do on the books. But she understands that I'm a writer, and that I'm not always going to be available to sit on the couch and watch TV with her, or to go out and do things. I spend my time writing. I've got a 5-year-old, so the amount of time I've been able to spend writing has been limited because I have to do my duty as a father. But I spend my time writing, and she knows that, and I try and watch Henry, my son, and do housework and all that so that she can be free to run her Etsy business and all that sort of thing. But in the early years, we hadn't struck that balance yet, and at times it was struggling. Yes?
In the beginning of starting to write, what kept you driven?
Honestly, the desire to be well known. I mean, you can dress it up all you want, but Hemingway said only a fool writes for anything other than money. But I was writing because I wanted to be better known. And then it turned into I was writing because I wanted to leave a little something of myself out there after I died. I've got all these books, and some of them are going to be read after I'm dead, which may be at the end of this hour, or maybe just in 30 years, but it's the desire to live on after my death. But yeah, I wanted to be better now. Yes?
Do you encourage your wife to do a Kickstarter for her Etsy business or anything like that?
If my wife wants to do a Kickstarter for her Etsy business, I completely support her. It hasn't actually become a business yet. She's going to be embroidering and quilting. But if she wants to kickstart it that way, sure, more power to her. Yes.
What sort of inspirations do you have when you started writing all these books?
The desire to be better known was my main inspiration. That was it. I mean, well, let's be honest here. You want to be better. People write for pleasure. People write for money. People write because they want to be better known. I just happen to be the latter. I'm never going to make a huge amount of money, but I can be a little better known. Yes.
When you, I was a little bit late to my already said this, but when you first had the publisher want to turn your webpage into a book, were you surprised, or was it in the back of your mind that somebody might want to do that?
I was surprised. This was '99, pretty much the dawn of the internet, and the idea that someone might take a website and turn it into a book, it had probably been done, but it wasn't happening a lot. And so the idea that I might make my website into a book was kind of shocking to me, but once it was suggested, I was all for it. Yes.
When you're making the website into a book, since you want to make money off of the book, did you end up closing the site, or did you keep it open the entire time?
Kept it open the entire time. I think that you grow your audience by being generous like that, and that is counterproductive and self-defeating to yank the website down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has anyone ever stolen your ideas?
Yeah, I've had my work stolen and copied, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you can just I just take it as flattering.
Copy? If it's copy, if it's plagiarism, right?
Yeah, it's plagiarized. I've been plagiarized in Spain. I've been plagiarized in Japan. I've been plagiarized in Ukraine and the Soviet Union. But that's the internet. You know, things are going to be copied and pirated, and if you can't accept that, then you don't put your work online and you hide in your office and never publish anything. It's just part of doing business. Yes.
What kind of responses have you had from critics? Have they been positive or negative?
I've been very lucky when it comes to critics. I remember every negative thing anyone's ever said about me, but when it comes to the critics, most of them have been very complimentary. Which part of it is because I'm not bad at writing, but also part of it is because a lot of times they don't have anything to compare it to. Doesn't mean people don't say critical things about my work, and I remember, like I said, I remember every single word everyone said, and I'll get the bastards. But reception's been pretty good. Yes.
Have you accomplished your goal in your writing to want to become well known, or do you still feel like you're still striving to get more and more and more?
I've gone as far as I can with this. I'm never going to become really famous, so that's what I'm doing with fiction. Anybody else? It's 10 of.
Is fiction easier to get published than nonfiction?
I'll let you know when I find out. I would say no. Fiction is harder. But there are so many small press fiction publishers out there that maybe I think there are a lot more people writing fiction who want to be published than there are people who write what I write. So I've had it relatively easy being published. As far as publishing fiction, when I started submitting my work, I may find it easy to get published, I may not, I don't know. Anybody else? Sure.
So, what do you write?
The one I'm writing right now is a historical detective novel set in Brooklyn in 1872 and based on the life of a real female private detective. There was Margaret J. Thomas, who died in 1892, ran a private detective agency out of the back of her husband's shirt shop from 1866 to her death. And when she died, the New York Times called her the female detective of Brooklyn. And since that time and place is pretty interesting, I decided to make use of her life and write a detective novel. So I've got other ideas. I've got a steampunk Boxer Rebellion idea. But right now it's just detective. Yes?
What's your favorite part about steampunk?
I prefer steampunk that acknowledges the disparities in terms of social justice and economics and class and ethnicity and is politically aware. So something like Sherry Priest's work is very aware of class and economics, and so I'm a big fan of that. Steampunk that glorifies the male inventor or is just about sailing zeppelins, not so much. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much.